Greetings, fellow conquerors. This is darkfireslide, and welcome to another top 10 list here in Europa Universalis 4. Today, I'm going to be going over my picks for the top 10 impossible starts in EU4. These are nations where survival alone is an achievement, and excelling is a true test of patience and skill. I'm going to be sticking to the civilized world for this one, since most of the American starts are already difficult, thus warranting their own list. Without further ado, let's begin. Number 10, Saxe-Lauenburg. It's not easy being the smallest fish in a very, very big pond. Though you are a member of the Holy Roman Empire, this is a small consolation considering you start with a whopping 5 total development, duchy rank government, a leader with scores equaling a total of 4, and generic German ideas to top things off. Also, it's unlikely you'll be saved by the Emperor unless you manage to become a free city, but if you do that, then it's difficult to expand. It's a rough start, but it's in Europe, Western Tech Group, and it's in the HRE, so we still have far more difficult times ahead of us. Number 9, Navarra. Navarra has the opposite problem of the previous nations. Whereas Lauenburg is surrounded by many hungry neighbors, Navarra is small and surrounded by 3 very, very big nations. Options for expansion require finesse and exploitation of a country during a time of great duress. You're also on a time limit, since France and Castile are likely to want to vassalize you or annex you as soon as possible. Even once you manage to get a foothold, you will likely then have to deal with other larger nations wanting to take advantage of your lack of military ideas. France in particular proves to be especially problematic once they get Elan. Also, your culture is just weird, making rebellions more likely in conquered lands unless you switch to a different primary culture or tag. Number 8, Circassia. The Caucasus mountain range is home to several nations which are most likely due for annexation within the first 50 years of the game. Of the whole lot, Circassia likely has the worst time of it. Why? 2 reasons. For one, Circassia is orthodox, which means that useful alliances are extremely difficult to come by. It's likely that the only useful ally you will have at first is Muscovy, if you can manage to swing it. Which brings us to the other huge problem with Circassia. Your government is a chiefdom! This means you only have 2 diplomatic slots for the price of a bonus 10% to manpower and force limit, which is a small consolation for a nation as small as yours. The only saving grace of your country is that you have additional coring costs to help deter potential invaders. This only goes so far, however, when you've got a base development of 20 in steppes terrain. Your options for expansion involve delving into Sunni lands or Shia lands, or attempting to take clay from your bigger Orthodox neighbor, Georgia. Will you stand true to the Orthodox faith, or abandon the creed to get lower unrest in conquered horde lands? Either way, you're likely going to have a hard time, as Circassia. Number 7, Theodoro. One thing that makes the start truly difficult is an inability to expand. Theodoro certainly has this problem. Being Orthodox, alliance options are slim pickings, and having a neighbor with a permanent casus belli on your country can cause serious issues when playing as the only Gothic nation in the entire world. As a result, Theodoro ends up being a bit of a crapshoot at the start, with some luck needed to get alliances to beat Crimea, and unfortunately Genoa isn't really an option for expansion either, since they start as part of the Empire. Life is hard, but at least your starting ruler is a 2-5-4. Number 6. Mazab, Togurt, and Jared. These 3 nations are a trinity of difficulty. For starters, they begin in a hostile desert environment that is difficult to develop, and because everyone around them has Berber traditions, expansion is seriously handicapped by an increased 50% coring cost, which is a huge insult given the low quality of the lands in general. Expansion can be tough unless you manage to find a good ally with one of the bigger nations around you. But even then, that might only stave off their hunger for your clay for some time. Your Muslim tech group is sure to put you behind the curve in the late game as well. Number 5, Jaisalmer, Nagaur, Bastar, and other Indian miners. While being in the minimum development isn't the only criteria for being a tough start, it certainly doesn't help either. Playing as one of these Indian one-province miners is a lot like being in the HRE, except there is no one to save you if things go horribly wrong. Your expansion is limited to your very small neighbors, unless you can swing a strong alliance from the get-go. This all assumes that those small nations around you don't get big alliances of their own. If you account for achievements, Nagaur perhaps has the hardest time of all these nations in attempting to achieve the infamous Raja of the Rajput Reich, wherein Nagaur must somehow own the entirety of Germany before the game ends in 1821. This is a sure challenge for even the most veteran players. Did I mention that most of their leaders have 2 1s and a 0 to start with? Number 4. Sarig Yogir. Being a horde is usually a good time, even without the Caustics expansion, which lets you raise provinces to get monarch points to help you keep up on technology. Having a permanent casus belli against everyone at all times is a lot of fun. But what about a horde that starts with a whopping 5 development? The situation isn't completely hopeless for the little guy, though. An alliance with Oirat is certainly possible, but the looming threat of Ming is always hanging over you and your ally's head. The initial clay you can expand into isn't that great either. One small consolation, however, is that your starting province has salt. You're going to need plenty of it with this start. Oddly enough, this is one of the more interesting starts on this list, but it's no less difficult for that. Number 3. Dahomey. Let's look at the pros and cons of Dahomey quickly. Dahomey gets 25% increased hostile core creation costs, 15% better manpower, 5% cheaper tech costs, 5% discipline, and yearly prestige from national ideas. They start out at kingdom rank. However, Dahomey also starts out with 3 total development. With the introduction of fetishism into the game, getting alliances as this tiny nation is more difficult than ever. You're also in the Central African region, a region which makes westernization difficult, and being in the West African tech group raises your tech costs by 60%. Your options for expansion aren't that great either, and you must rely on allies that, if you start neighboring them, will likely want to eat you rather than keep an alliance. As Dahomey, you are essentially always behind the curve and outmatched by your enemies, whether African or Western. But hey, at least you get a cool flag. Number 2. Albania and Athens. These two nations, especially Albania, are the flagship nations for players who enjoy a challenge or like being the underdog. A while ago, Albania actually started out at war with the Ottomans, spelling a certain death for the little guy without some seriously cheesy tactics. Both Athens and Albania get some great ideas, so if they manage to survive their precarious starting position, they actually have some good bonuses to take to the late game, unlike many of the nations in this list. Still, overcoming the Ottomans when they have a core in your country from game start, or starting as the vassal of a country due for swift annexation is extremely difficult. Albania is at least Catholic, and with a little luck can expand into Naples, or at least Serbia. Athens, on the other hand, after winning its independence must simply pray for an alliance with a merciful great power. Both of these nations are certainly challenging, to say the least. Honourable mentions. First of all, I feel like people would be a little bit remiss if I didn't at least give credit to Byzantium. However, of the nations in this list, while Byzantium is indeed difficult and a fan favorite for good reason, it isn't up to the caliber of difficulty that the other nations in this list present, especially since Byzantium has so many cores in Ottoman clay at game start. 2 more honorable nations I want to bring up are Riga and the recently added Russian nation of Odiev, right here, this little guy. Both start in a reasonably difficult position, but even so, they aren't quite as difficult as some of these smaller nations. And lastly, I wanted to mention the Irish states as well. While the beginning can be fun, overcoming England can prove to be an extreme challenge for an Irish player. But, without further ado, let's get on to our number 1. Number 1, RyuQ. For those uninitiated, you may have not even known that the mighty kingdom of RyuQ even existed. RyuQ is a small nation on an isolated island near Japan. RyuQ starts out with a whopping 5 development, and has a lofty goal ahead of it: world conquest. No, I'm serious. There's an achievement for this nation called the 3 Mountains, wherein RyuQ must own and have cores on the entire world. This typically requires cheesy strategies and exploits galore, but considering this nation's start, it's no surprise that such drastic measures are necessary. To even begin as this nation, you essentially must declare a war without a casus belli on a weaker nation somewhere far from your own island to begin expansion. After that, you must somehow deal with the ensuing rebels, which is no mean feat considering you're an animist country. The Chinese tech group further impedes your progress, making it so you will likely have to deal with the painful and slow process of westernization later if you're going for world conquest. Doing well as RyuQ is truly a challenge and a test to any EU4 player worth his salt. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this top 10, make sure to leave a like, or comment with your own picks, or if you agree or disagree with the list. And, of course, subscribe if you want to see more EU4 top 10s and other content in the future. And I'll see you on the next one.